Long-time lurker, first-time poster. Apologies if the writing is bad. I'm an avid caver. Whenever I tell people that, they usually give me the same confused look and ask one of two questions. The first is, what do you actually do down there? The second is, why the hell would anyone willingly do that? Both are fair questions. Caving is a difficult hobby to explain to someone who has never experienced it. You willingly climb into a hole in the ground, travel miles away from sunlight, and squeeze your body through spaces that sometimes look far too small to contain a human being. You crawl through mud. You scrape your knees, elbows, and shoulders against rocks. You get soaked by freezing underground streams. Sometimes you spend hours lying flat on your stomach while moving forward 1 inch at a time. There is always the possibility of getting injured somewhere, that paramedics cannot easily reach you. There is also the slightly more terrifying possibility of getting stuck underground forever. Most people seem to think you have to be some kind of lunatic to enjoy it. Maybe they're right. I'm not trying to brag or make myself sound tough, but I honestly don't usually get fazed when I'm underground. I've had close calls. I've been in situations that would probably make most normal people swear off caves for the rest of their lives. A few years ago, I got stuck while squeezing through a gap that was no more than 30 inches high. I was flat on my stomach with both arms stretched ahead of me. My chest was pressed against the floor and the ceiling was scraping across my back. I couldn't move forward because several lumps of rock were catching against my shoulders and hips. I couldn't reverse because my boots had become wedged at an awkward angle behind me. I had to reach into my equipment pouch, pull out a multi-tool, and slowly chip away at the rock knuckles blocking my path. I could only move my wrist a few inches, so it took more than 4 hours to make enough space. 4 hours trapped inside a crack in the earth, unable to turn my head properly. I stayed calm, controlled my breathing, and focused on solving one problem at a time. Eventually, I got through. On another trip, I accidentally entered a closed tunnel that looked almost identical to an open passage on the cave map. The tunnel narrowed and dipped sharply downward. By the time I realized my mistake, gravity had pulled me headfirst into the tightest section. I spent nearly 2 hours hanging upside down, with my helmet scraping against the stone beneath me. That one was uncomfortable. Blood rushed into my head. My arms started going numb, and every movement seemed to wedge me more tightly into the passage. The trick in situations like that is not to fight the cave. Panic makes you tense your muscles and causes your body to expand. You waste energy, burn through oxygen, and make yourself harder to move. You have to breathe slowly. Relax each part of your body and use small, controlled movements to change your position. It took a while, but I eventually managed to bend one knee, brace my foot against the wall, and rotate myself far enough to slide backward. I came out with a splitting headache and bruises covering half my body, but I never considered quitting. That was just part of caving. There has only been one time when I genuinely questioned my life choices. It happened about 3 months ago, and I'm still having nightmares about it. Part of the reason I'm writing this is because I'm hoping that putting the experience into words might provide some kind of relief. I was exploring a cave in Colorado. I'm not going to give the exact location because the entrance is on land that is already sensitive to visitors, and I don't want inexperienced people trying to locate it after reading this. The entrance was nothing more than a hole in the ground, surrounded by dry grass and loose stone. Unless you knew what you were looking for, You could probably walk within 10 feet of it without realizing it was there. Inside, the entrance dropped into a sloping chamber and then separated into several different passages. The cave is what people in the community sometimes call a training cave. That doesn't mean it's completely safe. No cave is completely safe. It means the system isn't particularly deep or complicated. You don't need to be an expert to navigate most of it, but it contains enough variety to help beginners experience the real thing. There are climbs, narrow sections, uneven tunnels, and a few decent squeezes. Experienced cavers also use it to sharpen specific skills without committing to a major expedition. I had gone there alone to practice horizontal squeezes. Before anyone jumps on me for caving solo, I know the risks. I had left my route and expected return time with 2 people. I carried backup lighting, emergency supplies, and enough equipment to handle most realistic problems. That doesn't make solo caving smart, but it means I wasn't wandering into an unknown hole, wearing shorts and carrying the flashlight from my phone. About 40 minutes into the cave, I found the perfect passage. It was a low, horizontal tunnel running underneath a slab of dark limestone. The gap was tight enough that I would have to remove part of my equipment and push it ahead of me, but it wasn't narrow enough to be especially dangerous. I lay down in front of it and shone my flashlight into the passage. The beam traveled maybe 30 or 40 feet before the tunnel curved out of sight. I picked up a small stone and skimmed it along the floor. Cavers sometimes do this to get a rough sense of distance or identify sudden drops in passages where visibility is limited. The stone rattled away into the darkness before eventually coming to a stop. Everything seemed normal. I pushed my equipment bag into the tunnel, stretched my arms in front of me, and began working myself forward. The floor was mostly smooth, which made the movement fairly easy. I turned my head sideways to fit beneath the ceiling and used my toes to push while pulling against the stone with my fingertips. I had traveled maybe 10 feet when I heard something. At first, it sounded like rain, just a faint pitter-patter striking stone somewhere in the distance. I stopped moving and listened. The sound continued. My first thought was that there must have been an almighty downpour happening on the surface. Caves carry sound in strange ways. Water moving through cracks can echo through chambers and make it seem much closer or farther away than it really is. There had been a possibility of rain in the forecast, but nothing severe. I remained still for a few seconds, trying to decide whether I should reverse out of the passage. Then I realized the noise wasn't coming from above me. It was coming from ahead, and it was getting louder. The pitter-patter became a dry, rapid scratching. Thousands of tiny impacts overlapping until they sounded almost like static. I lifted my head as far as the ceiling allowed and aimed my flashlight down the tunnel. Something moved beyond the strongest part of the beam. At first, I thought it was water, a dark wave spilling around the curve and spreading across the floor. Then the wave reached the light. It was spiders. I don't mean a group of 20 or 30 spiders. I don't even mean hundreds. The entire passage seemed to turn black. There must have been tens of thousands of them, maybe more. Tiny ones, no larger than ants, moved between spiders the size of bottle caps. They covered the floor, walls, and ceiling, all traveling in the same direction, straight toward me. They moved so closely together that they looked like a living carpet. There was nowhere for me to go. The tunnel was too narrow to turn around. My arms were stretched ahead of me, and my equipment bag blocked part of the passage. Even if I had started reversing immediately, they would have reached me before I moved more than a few inches. I remember making this strange, choking sound. Not a scream. There wasn't enough room in my chest for that. For a second, every instinct in my body told me to thrash, kick, and claw my way backward. Then the rational part of my mind took over. If I panicked in that position, I could wedge myself permanently. I could injure my shoulder or become tangled in my equipment. I could trap myself in that tunnel long after the spiders had passed, so I did the only thing I could think of. I switched off my flashlight. I closed my eyes. Then I pressed my face against my sleeve and gripped the rock. The spiders reached my hands first. I felt thousands of tiny legs moving across my gloves and crawling beneath the edges of my sleeves. Then they flowed over my helmet and across my back. The sound was unbelievable. It was like lying underneath heavy rainfall, except I could feel every drop moving. They crawled across my cheeks and over my closed eyelids. Several became trapped between my face and the stone floor. I felt them flipping and struggling against my skin. Some went down the back of my shirt. Others moved around my neck and beneath the straps of my helmet. One crawled across my upper lip. I clenched my jaw so hard that my teeth hurt. I kept telling myself that they were only trying to get past me. I was an obstacle. As long as I stayed still, they would continue moving. I don't know how long it lasted. At the time, it felt like 20 minutes. Looking back, it was probably 40 or 50 seconds. Eventually, the scratching began to fade behind me. I stayed completely still for another minute before opening my eyes. Then I turned my flashlight back on. The tunnel ahead was almost empty. A few spiders still moved along the walls, but the black carpet had disappeared. I could hear it continuing through the passage behind me, traveling toward the cave entrance. I didn't know whether turning around would force me through them again, so I pushed forward. My entire body was shaking. Every few seconds I imagined I could feel something crawling beneath my clothes. I wanted to rip my shirt off, but there wasn't enough room. I moved faster than I should have and scraped my elbows raw against the floor. When I finally reached a section large enough to sit upright, I tore off my helmet and equipment. There were spiders inside my collar, sleeves, and backpack. Most scattered as soon as they were exposed to the light. I must have disrupted some enormous nesting area with the flashlight or the stone I threw. Maybe the vibration made them think the tunnel was collapsing. Maybe I disturbed whatever they had been feeding on. I honestly don't know. I still cave. I've gone underground several times since then, but I'd be lying if I said the experience didn't change me. My confidence in tight, head-first tunnels has weakened. Before entering a squeeze, I sometimes lie there listening for several minutes. Occasionally, when water drips onto my helmet or loose gravel shifts somewhere in the darkness, I hear that same pitter-patter. My body freezes before my brain has time to understand what the sound actually is. Every caver learns to respect unstable rocks, flooding, bad air, and the possibility of becoming trapped. But there is another thing we need to remember. When we climb underground, we are the guests. There are things that live their entire lives beneath our feet, things that have never seen sunlight and have no reason to fear the dark. To us, a cave is somewhere we visit. To them, it is home.
None of the stories you hear on this channel come from third-party sources.
No Reddit, Google, or YouTube copy pasta. They are all original writing by me. Keeping up with the writing can be difficult, but seeing this small channel grow into a small community makes it so worth it. If you like the stories, please like and subscribe and join us. Your support helps me keep the channel going. Thanks so much. Most strangers I meet, after getting to know me, eventually come to the conclusion that I'm a lunatic. That's because I'm an avid cave diver. Normal scuba diving apparently wasn't dangerous enough for me. I needed to swim into narrow underground tunnels, hundreds of feet below the surface, where there's no natural light, no direct route to open air, and sometimes barely enough space to turn around. It's like someone trapped in a cave once thought, this would be much better if it were completely flooded. As you can imagine, cave diving is statistically a deadly undertaking. There has consistently been at least one cave diving death every year for as long as I can remember, and usually there are several. Equipment fails, tunnels collapse, divers become disoriented. A careless movement can stir up enough sediment to reduce visibility to zero. In an ordinary dive, if something goes wrong, you swim upwards. In a cave, upwards is often solid rock. Because of the danger, those of us who call this our life tend to form very close bonds. You have to trust the people diving beside you. Sometimes you're trusting them with your life. My best friend, my brother from another mother, was a man named George Palmer. I met George during my final year of high school. He was the person who took me on my first proper dive, and over the following 20 years, we traveled all over the world together. Mexico, Iceland, Belize, Egypt, the Philippines. We searched for places lost to the elements, flooded ruins, collapsed mines, underwater caves, and forgotten tunnels. On rare occasions, we found somewhere that no human being had ever seen before. That feeling was priceless. George was always the better diver. His family were born adventurers. His grandfather had climbed mountains. His father had crossed deserts. George moved through underwater caves like he was a descendant of Atlantis. I was proud of the skills I'd taught myself. But George had instincts that couldn't be learned. He could study a rock formation for a few seconds and somehow know where a tunnel would lead. He could feel changes in the current before any of our equipment registered them. He was so good that he regularly received commissioned work from television studios and film companies. If they needed beautiful underwater shots, footage of a shipwreck, or images from inside some remote sea cave, George got the call. They would fly him to a tropical paradise, put him in a nice hotel, and pay him to do the thing he loved most. 3 years ago, that dream became a nightmare. George had been commissioned to film material for a documentary about Spanish naval history. He was tasked with exploring a submerged cave around 40 miles off the eastern coast of Spain. The location was breathtaking. Warm Mediterranean water, clear skies, and the remains of several vessels believed to have belonged to a Spanish naval convoy. The documentary crew weren't interested in the deeper sections of the cave. They only wanted footage of the entrance, where pieces of timber, cannon, and broken pottery had been carried inside by the current over the centuries. George, being George, however, had applied for permission to explore further. It was supposed to be a routine solo dive. He checked his equipment thoroughly. He planned his route meticulously. He left markers and carried more than enough backup air. But even the best laid plans can fall apart. My best friend never resurfaced. After 2 days of searching, George was declared deceased and lost to the ocean. The diving community was devastated. His family were destroyed. I don't think I left my apartment for nearly a month. The worst part was knowing he was still down there. George's mother kept saying she couldn't bury an empty coffin. His father became obsessed with recovering the body. Every few weeks, he called salvage companies, commercial divers, and government agencies, only to be told the same thing. The recovery was too dangerous. Eventually, we began raising money ourselves. The diving community contributed. George's former employers donated equipment. His parents remortgaged their house. 3 months ago, we finally had enough money to organize a private expedition. I would be the one going into the cave. Body retrieval is always risky. There's a high chance that the people searching will meet the same fate as the person they're trying to recover. But George had saved my life twice. I wasn't leaving him down there. The dive was morbidly beautiful. The water was so clear that the sunlight reached far below the surface, illuminating the wreckage scattered across the seabed. I passed a cannon half buried in sand and the remains of a wooden hull slowly being consumed by coral. The cave entrance was a huge black opening in a wall of pale stone. George's guideline was still attached near the entrance. I followed it inside. The dive itself was surprisingly simple. The first tunnel was wide enough for 3 divers to swim side by side. The current was weak, and there were no major drops or difficult restrictions. I couldn't understand how a diver of George's level had got into trouble. About 40 minutes into the dive, I entered a connecting tunnel and found him. His skeletal remains were floating upright in the darkness. His suit, tanks, mask, and camera equipment were all still attached. One hand rested against the cave wall. The other hung loosely at his side. There was no evidence of a struggle. His air supply had been exhausted, but none of his backup equipment had been used. His emergency tank was still full. It looked as if George had simply stopped moving and waited to die. I secured his remains in a recovery harness and began the journey back. When I reached the surface, his parents were waiting on the support boat. I will never forget the sound his mother made when she saw the harness being lifted from the water. It wasn't a scream. It was something deeper, as if 3 years of grief had left her body in one single breath. There was relief in that moment, too. George was coming home. That night, alone in my hotel room, curiosity got the better of me. George's camera had been protected inside a reinforced waterproof housing. The camera itself was damaged, but the memory card appeared intact. I cleaned it, inserted it into my laptop, and found nearly 2 hours of footage. Watching it was bittersweet. It was incredible to see my friend alive again, to hear him breathing and quietly talking to himself as he checked his equipment. For the first half hour, everything went perfectly. George was comfortable and relaxed. He inspected the wreckage, filmed the cave walls, and occasionally made comments for the documentary crew. Then his movements changed. He became sluggish. His breathing grew slower, and the camera began drifting from side to side. At first I assumed he was tired. Then I heard him mumbling. The words made no sense. He repeated the same sounds several times, almost like a child trying to remember a song. The camera jerked violently. A crazed laugh echoed through the cave. It was followed by a soft giggle. A chill ran down my spine. My first thought was nitrogen narcosis. Every diver knows about it. Under pressure, nitrogen can affect the brain, causing confusion, poor judgment, and sometimes hallucinations. It makes you feel like you've just finished 3 bottles of whiskey by yourself. In extreme cases, divers have ripped off their masks, abandoned their guidelines, or swum into the open ocean, convinced they were heading toward safety. I assumed the laughter was George losing his mind. That was until the final few seconds of the footage. Through the laughter, I heard George's voice. He sounded completely sober, completely terrified. He whispered, "Who are you?" Then the screen went black. I replayed those final seconds dozens of times. The laughter hadn't come from George. It was too high-pitched, almost childish. But there was something rough beneath it. Something that sounded like 2 voices laughing at the same time. I told myself it was an audio distortion. I told myself pressure had damaged the microphone. Then I noticed something else. A few seconds before George spoke, the camera briefly pointed towards the tunnel behind him. There was someone standing there. Not swimming, standing. The shape was tall and pale, with its feet resting against the cave floor. Its arms hung beside an unnaturally thin body. It wasn't wearing diving equipment. It had no mask, no tanks, nothing. It was at least 40 meters inside a flooded cave. I froze the frame and enlarged it. The image became grainy, but I could make out a head tilted slightly to one side. There were 2 black spaces where the eyes should have been, and it was smiling. I didn't sleep that night. The following morning, I showed the footage to the expedition leader. He watched it in silence and then asked if I had entered the same tunnel. I told him I had. He asked whether I had seen anything. I said no. That wasn't entirely true. During my return journey, while towing George's remains, I thought I heard something behind me. A faint clicking sound. I assumed it was equipment knocking against the rock. But when I stopped moving, the clicking continued. 3 clicks, a pause, then 3 more. It followed me all the way to the cave entrance. The expedition leader wanted the footage kept private. He said releasing it would cause unnecessary speculation and interfere with the documentary company's investigation. I agreed. George's funeral took place 2 weeks later. His parents finally had somewhere to visit him. His mother thanked me for bringing her son home. His father hugged me and cried against my shoulder. For a while, I believed that was the end of it. Then, about a month ago, I received a package. There was no return address. Inside was a padded case containing George's damaged camera. I assumed the documentary company had returned it as a personal item. There was also a note. It contained only 1 sentence. "You brought back the wrong one." I contacted the company immediately. They claimed they hadn't sent the package and had never taken possession of George's camera. I called the expedition leader. He didn't answer. I called again the next morning. His wife answered and told me he had disappeared. His boat had been found drifting several miles from the coast. The engine was running. His phone was on the seat, and a set of diving tanks was still secured beneath the deck. There was no diving suit aboard. No fins, no mask. It looked as though he had simply stepped into the sea. That night, I checked George's camera again. There was another video file on the memory card. It hadn't been there before. The file was 12 seconds long. It showed my hotel room. I was asleep in the bed. The camera appeared to be sitting on the desk, filming me from the other side of the room. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then I sat upright. My eyes opened. I looked directly into the camera and smiled. A high-pitched giggle came from my throat. The video ended. I destroyed the camera. I smashed it with a hammer, broke the memory card into pieces, and burned everything in a metal container behind my house. It didn't make any difference. I still hear the clicking. Sometimes it comes from beneath the floorboards. Sometimes it comes from inside the walls. When I shower, I hear it behind the sound of the water. 3 clicks, a pause, 3 more. Last week, George's mother called me. She said she had been having strange dreams. Dreams where George stood at the bottom of the ocean, staring up at her. She said he kept trying to tell her something. I asked what. She started crying. He says you shouldn't have touched him. I haven't been diving since the recovery. I barely leave the house. Yesterday morning, I woke up standing in my bathroom. The bathtub was full of water, and I was wearing my diving suit. My emergency tank was strapped to my back. There were wet footprints leading from the tub to the hallway. They weren't mine. They were long and narrow, with 6 toes on each foot. I know how this sounds. Most strangers who get to know me think I'm a lunatic. And maybe they're right. Maybe grief has broken something inside my head. Maybe watching my best friend's final moments caused some kind of psychological collapse. That's what I keep telling myself. But tonight I found salt water dripping from the ceiling above my bed. There are no pipes up there. And just before I began writing this, I heard George's voice coming from inside my closet. He whispered my name. Then something giggled and asked me the same question George asked in that cave. Who are you? I haven't answered. The clicking has started again. This time, it's coming from inside my chest.